Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tech Leaders Hub, episode number 10. Joining me today is Evgeny Sharypin. Evgeny, how are you doing today?
Well, it's hello, Jakob. Thanks for having me here today. I've been doing quite well, actually. I've been a victim of a heat wave for the last week. Now it's finally over. The weather is nice, and I can finally think clear again, for which I'm extremely grateful.
Okay, you're currently in Russia, right?
Yeah, that's true. I'm currently visiting my hometown of Dubna, which is a small but a very interesting city, 100 kilometers north of Moscow. We're so cool. We even have a periodic table, an element in the periodic table of elements. It's one number 105. Check it out. It's called
Okay,
Dubny.
element. That's super interesting. Element 105, and you know what's interesting is I'm joining from my hometown too. For the people tuning in that might have seen some of the previous episodes, the background's different. I'm actually in my hometown as well. Doesn't have an element on the periodic table. Anyway, for you, everybody joining in, dear watchers and listeners, I hope this is working for you in the sense that you can see us and you can hear us. Please leave a comment wherever you're watching. You might be watching on LinkedIn, on YouTube, or maybe on our Facebook group, which is still kind of starting to grow. We're getting there. Wherever you're seeing this, please leave a comment. Let us know that everything is working correctly so that we don't have to worry about technical issues. If you can see us, if you can hear us, please let us know. And people are going to be joining in, gradually. Evgeny, I wanted to ask you, just before we launch into everything else, who do you hope is tuning in today? Who will benefit from listening to our conversation?
Well, I think that a lot of people from Sendcloud will join, for which I'm grateful. Thanks, guys. I'm happy to share my experiences in being a manager, especially being a manager in a hypergrowth company at such a big stage. So I hope that my talk of today will be useful for people who are aspiring to go into management, or for people who are trying to figure out what their expectations from their manager should be, or people who are already trying to manage and trying to get a grip on it.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting aspect to it, that you don't have to be a manager to benefit from this conversation. You can just learn what to expect. I can see a lot of people are saying hi over in the chat. Hello to Justina joining in from our team. Hello, Justina. Here's Dimitri saying everything seems fine. Good to know. Cathal over on LinkedIn is saying everything is perfect. I have this comment here. I think it's a city.
Yes, that's a city.
Okay.
That's probably my brother checking in. Hello.
Hello there. Yeah, quite a few people. People really like this moment when their comments come in and when they see themselves on the stream. So just to get through all of them, here's Yaro Pedro saying, "Hey." I must have butchered that name. I'm sorry. And then Julie saying hello from Dubna itself. Excellent. Okay, thank you. I guess everything is working and we can just get right into it. Okay, so I'm going to kind of fulfill my usual tradition here. And before we get more into your background, into your work at Sendcloud, because I do want to talk about that a lot more, I want to ask you to give our watchers and listeners a little bit of value just up front, okay? So I wanted to ask you, this is a series of live streams, maybe someday a series of podcasts for tech leaders. What is your number one tip for tech leaders? What should they be doing differently?
Well, I have gained my number one tip for any leaders anywhere, not only in tech, but I think anywhere, is that we as leaders should prefer to be kind over being nice, which are two very similar but quite different concepts, right? So, for example, like, I think the most straightforward example there is delivering not negative. Well, I mean, we can say negative feedback to your reports, right? So you can try to be nice by holding it from them and not telling them when they are experiencing problems or there is maybe even some bad PR going around their persona, but you try to shield them too much and in trying to being nice. But instead of that, we should try to be kind and instead help people by delivering those bad news in an open, honest way, so that they can at least try to grow from it rather than keeping it from them. So yes, I think that's the most important thing: being kind over being nice.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it's something that I think a lot of leaders. I mean, I'm thinking about it myself. Okay, I'm a team lead myself, and it's something to bear in mind that being too nice can be unkind if you're thinking about your people growing their skills, becoming better, being ready to take on more responsibility. I think that is a great tip, and it's a great kind of piece of mindset to have in the back of your mind, if I can say it so. Thank you for that. That's going to make for a great kind of self-contained clip, I bet, based on this. So thanks for that tip. Like I mentioned, before we go into the meat of, you being your work as a manager and your further tips for, managing teams or large teams or teams when you're in a hyper-growth stage, because that's kind of the topics we'll be revolving around today. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your background, your origin story up until this point. If you could let the watchers and listeners that we have know a little bit more about you and how you ended up here and what your current situation is, then I think that would be a great background for the conversation.
All right, sure thing. So yeah, I was born and raised here in Dubna, where I am right now. And at the age of 16, I got enrolled into a technical university of telecommunications and informatics in Moscow, where I studied telecommunications, and my specialty was applied cryptography in communications. And yeah, so on my third year of studies, I decided that it's time to get a job. So I started my career as a network engineer in a small-scale internet service provider. Then where I was doing mostly network jobs. Then there was, immediately after I joined, I saw that there was a lot of potential to optimize processes, which I still like to this day. Automating processes is very nice. And gradually over time, I grew there from being a network engineer into being more of a software engineer and a sysadmin, where I was handling all kinds of server automatization using Ansible or developing tooling for internal use. I worked there for 3 years. It was great. I think the biggest project I've made there was this walled garden Wi-Fi authorization system. So in Russia, in order to use public Wi-Fi, you need to authorize. Usually it's being done by means of providing a phone number. You input your phone number, you get yourself a code back, and then you get access to the internet. I've did 3 iterations of that project, of the product even. It was very interesting because essentially I was in the lead of this whole project from all perspectives, right? There was only one other developer in that company, and I needed to do product things, I needed to do testing, I needed to do deployments. So it was a great all-rounder task there. But eventually I've graduated, and it was also a really great job to keep when I was still studying. But eventually I have graduated, and I've decided that it's time for me to try something new. So I have joined Acronis, one of the biggest Russian IT enterprises. They are making all kinds of backup solutions. Where I used to work as a build engineer, we were building. The main project was 11 million lines of C++ code, and it was also quite interesting because the biggest achievement that me and the rest of my teammates achieved there was that we set up a CI/CD pipeline for this project for the first time in the history of this project. People were able to get a build of their product on their merge requests, and we managed to cut the time to build from 12 hours to 40 minutes. That was great.
Oh, gosh, that is a huge difference.
Yeah, it was cool, but there was also a lot of compiler magic from from compiler gurus. It was great. But eventually, the company offices moved away quite far from Moscow, and I thought that, yeah, again, I'd like to try something new. So I have left this and joined a very, very small company, very small startup called Lidza, where I worked for like around a year. It was very exciting because there were 3 of us in the whole company. And that's where I actually learned one of the biggest career lessons of my life, because when I've joined the company, the code was it was a mess. And I was, young. Well, I'm still young, but then I was even younger, right? And very, very fundamentalist. So I was very adamant that the number one thing that's needed to be done there is to rewrite everything. So I rewrote everything, but unfortunately, by the time I completed that, we've lost our time to market, and we ended up with a product that was technically very good, but we've missed the product market fit. Well, that was one of the reasons why the company failed. There was, of course, other reasons, but eventually the company failed.
So you're saying that was like a lesson for you?
Yes, it was a very important lesson for me in figuring out that when good is good enough.
Right. Yeah. So, that's something we say in our team a lot too, But yeah, I guess that's what you would say to yourself back then, right?
For sure. That was truly one of the biggest lessons I've got in my career so far. But it's like when people tell you that smoking kills, you never trust them until you start coughing. So sometimes you have to learn in a hard way.
Okay. Yeah, and sometimes even past that point. So how about so is Sendcloud the next kind of stop in this journey?
Yes, exactly. So when the company started to fail and they became quite apparent that there won't be a way forward, I thought that, well, I would be definitely able to land a job in Russia. But then I decided, like, why not? Why not try something new and exciting and, challenge myself harder than I usually used to do. So I started looking for a job abroad. I only looked for a job in the Netherlands because I really like the Netherlands as a country. I find the culture there very appealing to my own set of values, right? So and yeah, that turned out to be the case. So I left Russia early 2019, and since then I've been working at Sendcloud. I think I was the 73rd employee there back when I joined. Now there are 330 people, so we're growing really, really fast.
Okay, so yeah,
that's how I ended up at Sendcloud.
So you're number 17 or 70?
73. 70. So 70. Yeah.
70. Yeah, it's still, very fast scaling. And yeah, that's something that we definitely want to touch upon here. Cathal is saying, it is lovely here. And just to be specific, he's saying the Netherlands. Yeah, I've never had a chance to visit, although I've heard great things. My wife has been, and she enjoyed it quite a bit. So let's talk about, well, not the Netherlands, but about Sendcloud. We were talking, obviously before this, when we were preparing, something that really appealed to me is like your unique position in terms of your position at Sendcloud, your kind of situation at Sendcloud, and the position of Sendcloud as a company. We mentioned here that it's a company going through hypergrowth, but could you set the scene a little bit more? What is happening, what has been happening, and what is your role in all of this?
Surely. I've joined Sendcloud. I joined it as a senior backend developer, and I've worked in this position for a year for the whole of 2019. And then eventually, well, perhaps I should talk a little bit more on what does Sendcloud do, right? So
Sure.
Sendcloud is a linking chain in the world of e-commerce, and we link together various e-commerce systems with various logistical service providers, or as we call them, carriers. Our founders, they started this business as a side business. Actually, they used to have had a web shop that they were selling phone cases, and they discovered that the most painful part of their business was actually handling shipping. So everything else was way easier compared to shipping.
Okay, so they were looking to solve their own pain, right?
Yes, exactly. So they were looking to solve their own pain, and they started up with building a very straightforward integration between their, I think, not sure, that they had a homegrown web shop, which they linked together with Postonal. Well, not they. The fable says that they found a friend who did it for them, and they gave him a crate of beer and a new iMac display. But yeah, and they started using that, and it became quite apparent to them that this is quite an untapped area from which a lot of value could be drawn.
Okay.
And since then, yeah, that's how Sendcloud started, right? So we were adding more carriers, more and more workshops, more and more cool functionalities, like shipping rules, which allow you to, automatically select a carrier for a parcel depending on certain conditions, things like this. So, and when I joined Sendcloud in 2019, the growth was, I would say, you were able to feel it, right? So I think that in December 2019, it was a different company rather than it was in January 2019. But everything changed
just for months.
tremendously.
Okay, yeah.
No, in the year of 2019, I felt the change, but it was nothing compared to what started to happen in March of 2020. So as soon as the pandemic hit, of course, lots of commerce was essentially forced to become e-commerce.
Sure.
And if you take a look at our graphs, like all kinds of our graphs, our parcel volume, our database load, any kind of a graph, it looks like this. So it was a huge bump, which immediately put us into a situation that is nice and scary at the same time, because yeah, we immediately became way more popular, but at the same time we needed to handle this popularity well. So, and since then, Sendcloud's been growing very fast with every. I think that if we're talking numbers, even in the April of 2020, we were shipping around 2 million parcels a month. Now we're shipping around 6 million parcels a month. So that is always, and yeah, so this tremendous growth required us to start changing really fast. And up until today, where things are changing at Sendcloud very fast, and that requires a lot of flexibility and adaptability from the management, from the employees, from all the organization.
Sure. Okay, and so, somewhere within that, somewhere within that, along the way, you became a manager yourself, right?
That's true. That so I always felt that I know how do I say it. I always felt attracted to the idea of becoming a manager because I really like interacting with people, perhaps more than I like. And what I also like is to figure out how systems work. And code systems are interesting, but systems of people and their interactions, they are even more interesting because people are way more fuzzy. And there is always this element of incompleteness, which really excites me. So indeed, on starting 2020, I became the lead backend developer, which was this role combined both the technical leadership together with people management. So I was a manager of everyone who belonged to the backend chapter within Sendcloud. And that was quite interesting for me because it was indeed, it required from me to show both technical leadership in terms of figuring out what to do tech-wise with people leadership. But eventually, by the end of 2020, the backend chapter grew to 20 people and became quite, and the thing is, our contexts grew as well tremendously. So when I joined, there were 3 teams with around 6 to 7 people in every team. And by the end of 2020, we have split, the teams they grew very big. And by the end of 2020, we split them into 6 teams. Now we have 8 teams. And it became quite hard to keep a track of what's going on in all of those 3 teams, which created a big challenge for me, both as a technical leader and as a people's leader. So that's why we have reorganized the way how Sendcloud, how management in Sendcloud works into, we have separated technical leadership from people leadership, kind of. It's still, it is still quite intertwined, but now we have separate chapter leads that care about mostly the technical direction with, and I am now in a position of a software development manager where I lead the scalability domain of Sendcloud. This domain handles the carriers and web shop integrations. And just recently we have started a new team internals that handles them. All kinds of internal services like invoicing, for example, synchronous payment processing, things like this. So what I do now is mostly leading this domain together with my counterpart on the product vertical, product lead. So that appears to be quite working.
Sure. Yeah. I have tons of questions about what you just said that have been popping in my mind kind of along the way. First of all, I wanted to circle back to something that you already said. You already mentioned twice that I find really interesting, and you were talking about kind of automating, or maybe not automating, but kind of looking at processes, but not as it pertains to software, but more as it pertains to people. You mentioned that people are a lot more fuzzy. So how do you, in practice, apply this processes thinking to teams and how you're leading, your team?
Well, one of the things that we really try hard to do here at Sendcloud is actually quite twofold. From one perspective, what we try to do is to lead with context rather lead with control. Right, so we prefer to set up such a situation for, instead of giving clear-cut goals and clear-cut objectives, we try to train ourselves and everyone in the team, actually, not so the managers, the employees, the adjacent departments, to think more about the outcomes of what they do, which creates way of a nicer atmosphere, and in turn it fosters the second part of it. So the agency, we really want to foster agency in everyone, agency about what to do with the process, what to do with the work that you're doing. So those are the 2 main pillars, as I believe it. But if you talk about process thinking in leading a team in practice, I think that one of the big pitfalls that a leader could fall into is designing a process that doesn't work for people because you have designed it completely on your own. And I did that as well several times, right? When you think about the problem, and you immediately think about the solution to it. So you think, yo, I know how to solve it. We're gonna set up this process and this and this and that, and then you bring this process to the team, and the team is, well, they might agree with that, but they will never be engaged with that process. Because people like to have, if you give people a say into the way how they work, they will enjoy the process and be engaged in the process way more. So I think that in order to set up a good process, the first thing you have to do is to talk to the people themselves, or like whether do they see a problem as a problem, or whether do they think a process change is needed, and try to create this process in such a way that it is grassroots, so it comes from the team itself rather than you showing down your vision on the teams.
Yeah, that is very interesting, and it brings to my mind a kind of situation where, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but sometimes I think it might happen that you're designing a process and, various people are involved. They see something and they say, like you mentioned, some part of the process is not a problem. Do you ever have situations where, that a step is necessary for some stakeholders, but for others, and again, if this doesn't apply, we can move on to the next question. But I'm thinking of a situation where some steps in the process are very important to some stakeholders, not so important to other stakeholders. Like, for example, why do we have to do X? Why do we have to do Y in this process? Do you ever have to resolve conflicts like this? Do you ever deal with such situations?
Oh, well, yes, of course, definitely. But also the thing is, it is quite often when somebody is being very adamant on keeping a certain thing in the process, a certain step or whatever, it is very important to understand what is their motivation behind it. Because asking the question why is probably the most important trait that I believe should be fostered in any professional on every level. Of course, at a certain degree, it becomes counterproductive, right? When you're asking why so much that you never actually progress anywhere. But what I don't see it much often. What I see way more often is that companies and teams and people, there are plenty of reasons for that, but they end up in a situation when they start questioning what is that they're doing and why is there a need for that. So perhaps if there is someone who is really adamant on a certain part in the process, you have to understand why they need it, right? Maybe you'll need to ask several times, but I think that quite often you will arrive to the conclusion that what they need is not what the process that they designed is achieving, and this could be streamlined better. But indeed, engaging in diplomacy is one of the corner pieces of what it does take to be a manager, right? So keeping up good relationships with stakeholders, giving up concessions here and there, trying to get this whole thing together, it's very important.
Yeah, that sounds exactly right. And I can say from my own experience that diplomacy can really help, and it's really needed in certain situations. I wanted to circle back to something else that you said within this general thread, leading by context. I wonder if you could say, how do you do that in practice? What do you say to your people that makes you lead by context as opposed to leading, I think, by control? You mentioned is the kind of the counterpart. So how does this style look in practice?
All right, well, that's a good question, because always it is a different story. Oops, I'm out of the Yep,
Yeah,
I'm
move
back.
the other way. Yeah, there you are, back in the frame.
But for example, what I was doing today and I was doing yesterday is we are now trying to come up with planning for the next quarter for Q3, and I think what a top-down approach, an approach that is based on control would look like this, right? So I would have went talk to some people, created a plan, go with this plan to the team and say like, hey guys, me and Simon, the product lead, we have thought about that and here's what you guys will be doing. But instead of that, what we this time is we invested quite a lot of effort to making a big mind map of everything there is to be done within our domain. And we have spent also invested quite a lot of time into describing what will be the outcomes of anything that there is on this mind map. So, for example, one of the big projects that we work on, the biggest perhaps, is developing our carrier SDK, the way to generalize carrier connections and scale it horizontally, which is actually quite a nice topic. I hope we get back to it later. But there are plenty of sub-projects, and some of them, all of those create different outcomes. So what I've tried to do this time is that I came with this to the team saying like, hey guys, here is the context, right? We need to achieve as the least amount of developer the engagement from development in order to enable a carrier, because this will result in our business teams to be in a higher velocity in our business teams, right?
Okay.
And then I've tried to get it out of the developers. So what is needed to be there to do that? Like what's there to be done? So we don't try to decompose your goals into very, very small bits. Instead of that, you try to collect as much as possible of context around the problem, and you come to your developers and say like, hey guys, here's the context, here's the problem, tell me what we can do about this.
Okay.
I think what's super important there is to really care about collecting the context properly, because if you do that, that could also really degrade very quickly into a situation where you tell people, yo, go do something, but you yourself don't know the context much. Which is, I mean, then developers come back and forth to you, and it becomes a real drag. So before setting up a goal like that, you should be really, really well into the context, so that you can be waking up in the middle of the night and you can still tell this whole context from top to bottom.
I see. Okay, so the way I understand it is, well, first of all, the thing that's stuck in my mind is, mind map, show kind of the complexity of everything and how the different pieces of the whole influence each other. And I think you mentioned that it's important to collect was it the context or the data?
Yes, the context.
The context. Okay.
Yeah, the context. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, just making sure about that. I think you cut out for me for just a second there. Okay. So I'm making sure that everybody heard that, and that they can hear it on the recording. Reynaldo is here with a comment that I wanted to highlight. That's one of the nicer practices in Sendcloud. I believe he's mentioning leading by context. I don't know if you're watching or just listening, Reynaldo, but you just got 2 thumbs up from Evgeny here, and thanks for sharing all of that. It's actually great inspiration even for me personally, and that makes me think about some of the things that I'm doing. So, thanks for sharing that, really.
Sure.
Now, I wanted to move on a little bit, still thinking about this unique context that you have at Sendcloud. There's a few elements to it. You mentioned that you have, quite a large team. I want to ask about that. But I think a lot of people are going to resonate with this concept of hypergrowth, that the company is growing so fast. And I'm a manager in the middle of it all. making, looking at the people who are going to be actually doing the work and trying to, keep up with this increased demand. So, and the scaling of the company. So do you have any specific tips for managers in this sort of situation? What should they do? What should managers do or tech leaders do when their company is going through hypergrowth?
Yes, perhaps. I think that, so I have a couple of notes here. Yes, so I would say that there are three or like several parts to it, right? First of all, I think what's very important is that when you get yourself into a hypergrowth situation, your hiring is going to change drastically. So, and the way the kind of people that you want to get inside your team is also going to change quite dramatically. Because, for example, when I've joined Sendcloud, I think I was one of the first engineers joining specifically as a backend engineer. Before that, Sendcloud was hiring full stack engineers. That was only the first dramatic shift there. But as you grow, you have to be aware that the situation has changed, and maybe you don't need to continue hiring full stack engineers. Maybe you should, take a look at that candidate who has, for example, never worked with web development, but was for the past 10 years, he was monitoring tens of thousands of phone system installations, right? So, and that person could change the way your team and the whole development organization looks at monitoring. I think that is a very important thing to remember, that at a certain moment your hiring has to change, and you should become more open to hiring people that do not fit into the mold that much, because otherwise, if you can still continue to keep growing with full stack people and without diversifying much, you won't be able to handle, when there is hypergrowth, new problems appear faster than you can resolve old problems. And new problems, and the thing is, they become more diverse as well. And if you keep your team, if you don't try to diversify your team and skill set, it will just become harder and harder. That's one of the things. Another important thing also related to hiring is that it takes quite some time for people to get up to speed as a developer, especially when they're working in a product-based company like Sendcloud, because the context there are big. I would, to be frank with you, I don't think that what we do at Sendcloud is quite hard tech-wise, but it is very, very hard from product perspective, right? Because
I see.
All shops are different, all carriers are different. In Europe is a patchwork of countries, and I mean, of course, there is the European Union, right? But even then, there is different cultures, different problems. Yeah.
Okay, so that's something that kind of builds the complexity.
The complexity is quite big, and I, for one, believe that exceptional people can get up to speed in 3 to 4 months after being at work. So the people take 8 months to a year. For me, it took around a year to get truly comfortable around Sendcloud, to the point, yes, as Joao mentions, there is also Brexit. But it has been a very fun experience at Sendcloud together with Brexit.
Very fun, you say.
Yeah, we needed to. That's actually quite a good example on how things can change very quickly. So very quickly, we were forced to rethink the way how we do shipments from UK to Europe in a situation where regulations change every month. So what I would also recommend, talking back about the context, there are 2 recommendations that I would give. One of them is that, accept the fact that when you hire a lot of people, it's not going to be working that well for the first half a year to a year. It's going to be quite wonky because people need time to absorb knowledge.
Yeah, yeah. You mentioned.
Yeah.
I just wanted to get that kind of because you cut out for just a little bit, so just to get at that on tape. Okay, you mentioned that technical people I think need 3 to 4 months to be onboarded. Could you kind of say that bit again, just for to
Yeah,
be
I
sure?
think that I mean, I think that people can get like technically speaking in terms of completing the onboarding checklist, right? And maybe
Sure.
even getting your first merge requests out. I think that people could do that in a week. But
Mhm.
I think that only truly exceptional people can get to the comfortable level of understanding the context of the company in 3 to 4 months. For most of the people, it takes 8 months to a year.
Okay. And how
And yeah,
do you know that you have this? Sorry, just to drill down a little bit more into this, but this is
mhm.
fascinating to me. How do you know that you have this context? What kind of questions can you answer that you have this context of the company or the product in general?
Well, I know. I think it's hard to spot in other people, but for myself, I started to realize that I have probably been onboarded already when I stopped hearing new words like about subsystems, right? So for the first
Okay.
year, every time I needed to work on a new feature or a new thing, I was working, and then I would discover that there is this subsystem I've never heard about ever, and I need to figure out how this interacts with what I'm building at the moment.
Okay. Okay.
And yeah, and if we're talking about seeing that in people, I guess you can see that in people when they start to be really proactive and not proactive on a on a high level basis, but proactive on the low level basis. So when you talk with them again about a change that is needed to be done in a certain system, they immediately bring it up to you that, hey, I know that this is connected and that is connected and all of those things, and that team is going to depend on that change. And it's just something that you cannot force. That's just something that just happens.
Okay. Yeah, that is great.
Yeah.
I'm glad I kind of followed up on that, and that's
Uh,
something that I think is worth striving for, so people know this context and they can. Because I feel like you can be tempted to take that responsibility on yourself, to think that okay, I should be the one that kind of holds the picture of the whole, in my head. But it can be much easier if the team has that too.
yeah, that's true. But also, what is also important there is that you must fight this temptation to just figure it all out on your own, because this way, first of all, you're going to get tired really quickly,
Hmm.
and probably you'll start hating your life. Second
Okay.
of all, by doing this, you will create an unhealthy dependency on your persona for the rest of the
Right.
company.
Yeah. If you think you're just
And
out there on your own, right?
yeah, what I mean is that everybody will believe that you are the only one who can fix their problems, and then that's how you can forget about having a vacation or having a nice, having a break during lunchtime, a longer break during lunchtime,
I see.
which everybody needs from time to time, right?
It's
But
good to have a break during lunchtime. Yeah.
the most important part of that is that if you are always taking all the responsibility for everything within your team, you are taking away the agency of your people, and you're taking away because I mean you're not the one you're not the only one working there, right? So your reports,
Hmm.
they also must at some point realize that they are responsible for their own domain, just maybe in a smaller scale, but in the same way as you are responsible for the domain. And if you're always picking up things for them, you are being paternalistic, right? So you start to
Right.
treat your reports as children, which is very improper.
Sure.
I don't have kids, right? But it's actually something. When I just started managing people, I thought that this is a very powerful metaphor, and I was feeling very good about myself because I thought, yes, I have figured out the secret of life. Management is just like parenting, which is super weird because I don't have kids. But the more I think about it, the more I think how wrong the sentiment is, because when you are a parent, you are directly responsible for children, but children, they cannot be responsible about themselves up until a certain age.
I see.
And they don't. I mean, eventually you need to give them their agency. But when you do that with adult people in a workplace and you strip people from their agency, in the best case scenario, they will become just executors of things. In the worst case scenario, they will feel that they are being treated like children, not given responsibility, not given praise. So yeah, it's very important to avoid being paternalistic, as I see it.
Wow, that is very interesting. I'm tempted to kind of go a little bit more into this. Before I do, though, I wanted to just highlight one more comment from Judith, saying hello from Austin. I'm really glad that we have people watching this from all around the world. So I didn't want anybody to miss that little bit of information. Anyway, yeah, I'm just promoting that we're an international thing. Sorry. Moving on.
Yeah.
You mentioned this kind of paternalistic approach, right? Do you have any particular, I don't know, any particular strategies, tactics, maybe some things that you say that indicate to your people that, I'm counting on you, I'm treating you like an adult here? Can you say, kind of contrast these a little bit more concretely? Because I would be very interested in hearing about that.
All right, well, I will try. I think, one of the aspects of being paternalistic is when you are shielding. I mean, that's also something that's commonly perceived as part of being a manager, is being a shit shield, so to speak, right? So
I see.
protecting people from all the unpleasant news and issues that are happening above you, and in the team you keep it very quiet. Instead of that, that is quite paternalistic, right? But when you do it, what you should be doing instead of that is you still have to filter it out quite some, but at the same time you must let the people know the extent. I mean, I guess it is about creating a good link between the cause and effect in people's minds. So we say like, hey, we're all adults here. Like, look, if this is something that we need to do, if we don't do this, these bad things will happen to us. And yeah, and I'm going to suffer for that, and you are going to suffer for that as well. Also, what I think is a good example from doing that is that when somebody is showing problems under the carpet. So let's say somebody have violated a certain guideline or certain rule that your company has. What is tempting to be done there is to do like talk it out in a private way and try to hide it from the rest of the company. I mean, from the rest of the team as well, right? So
sure.
In contrast to that, what I believe should be done is that you ask the person nicely to own to their mistake, to come say like, hey, you ask that person to come to their teammates and say like, hey guys, I have violated this rule because of this and that, and yeah, I would not do this anymore. And this way you are, making people responsible for their actions.
Right.
And also create an atmosphere where, and of course, at this point, you must be very, very vigilant to keep it blameless, right? So you do that not to publicly flagellate people. You do that to succeed as a company in general. So if you create some rules, you gotta uphold those rules, right?
So it's not about blaming; it's more about learning from the mistake together, and not just in private.
Yes, learning from giving the rest of your team to learn from that, but also learning that if you are making a mistake, you will need to, if you have, that you will need to, live up to it, right?
Yeah.
Of course, I mean,
Yeah.
it is, sometimes there is leeway in doing that, but as a general idea, you should be doing exactly that.
Yeah, I believe it's,
It's,
like many things in management, I guess it's a balancing act, but it's really inspiring what you're saying, in the sense that, even I feel this temptation sometimes to be this shield as a team lead, and I'm glad to have your perspective here to kind of weigh against this temptation. So I'm glad we went more into that. I know you mentioned you have a few more kind of points related to hypergrowth, so I don't want to go too deep into any one point, especially since we have just about 10 minutes left here in this session, really. I just want to remind everybody that if anything that you heard thus far was interesting and you want to follow up on it yourself, leave a comment, ask a question, and Evgeny is going to answer that for you. Meanwhile, is there anything else that you wanted to mention, in terms of dealing with hypergrowth, which kind of became the main topic here, I suppose, that is useful for people in a management position that they should look out for?
Right. Well, I would like to stress out two things. All right. One of them is trying to make your decisions data-driven.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing is to being on the lookout for projects that enable exponential growth. So trying to invest,
Okay.
looking really into that and trying to invest into this project the most. So first, let's talk a bit more about the data-driven decisions. When the company starts to grow, when a company is small, the relationship with stakeholders is actually quite. It tends to be easier, right? Because you are typically maybe sitting in the same room or maybe in the same floor. You get to go grab a lunch together. When the company grows, you start to notice that instead of your favorite teammate from a business team that you always used to solve their problems with, there are 5 people who have joined last month, and you have no relationship with them, and it is humanly not possible to build a relationship with people to the same deepness as it used to be when the company is small. So what becomes really important is starting to negotiate on metrics. So for example, what we try to do at Sendcloud, right, when taking a decision to integrate a carrier, it's not actually not working as it is now. We're trying. The idea is that before building a carrier, we try to ask ourselves what will be the projected revenue from the carrier, and then you compare it to some different other options.
Sorry,
and then
you cut off for a
decision
second. Sorry, if you could just repeat, what would be the projected what from it?
The projected revenue or projected growth.
Okay, yeah, pretty important for people to hear that. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, and yeah, so, or for example, what I really want to do, and I hopefully will do someday at Sendcloud, is that I want to make bugs prioritization driven by numbers. So, for example, a very basic one could be, you just crunch some numbers and you say that, hey, a user X gives us 1,000 euros of MRR, user Y gives us 10,000 of MRR. Then deciding which bug to fix first becomes easier. Or for example,
you prioritize the bugs by revenue then.
We don't do that yet, but it's just like one of the metrics that you could do. And the point is that when you have a metric to prioritize upon, you manage to the negotiations you're having with stakeholders from negotiating based on willpower, right? So who screams the most, or who says that my users are suffering the most?
Yeah.
You are negotiating on the hard numbers. Say like, hey, this will give us this effect, this will give us that effect. Another thing that's very important is trying to find out projects that enable exponential growth, like we do with Carrier SDK. So the carrier, we used to build all the carrier integrations on our own with our own developers. But as our company grew, as our business departments grew, the demand for integrating new carriers also grew dramatically, and we just cannot keep it up within our development anymore. So for the whole 2020 and now and in the future, we were developing this Carrier API and Carrier SDK, which is a set of technologies that allows either carriers themselves or some of our trusted partners like STX Next to build carriers for us. And that enables exponential growth, right? Because when you have an API and you want to have 10 carriers more a month, you can find yourself a new partner, right? Or you can talk to a carrier saying like, hey, did you know that you can integrate with us? So in this way, instead of being limited linearly by the amount of developers within your organization that can build carriers, you can expand in all directions by just having an interface and having a documentation, of course, and having the ability to add more and more partners to it. That's something that we're also doing with on the shop side this year. So hopefully by in the next year, we'll be able to do this exponential growth both ways.
Yeah, that is great to hear. And it's just, I love these kinds of conversations where you mentioned, we're looking at exponential growth and partners like STX Next make it possible to actually grow that way. Obviously, that is really nice to hear. And thank you for saying that. We have a question coming in. So I guess we're going to answer that one, maybe one extra, depends on how long your answer is. And we'll be slowly wrapping up because this hour just ran away from us. Anyway, Marcin here is asking, what do you think about teal organizations or teal management? It looks like you already practiced that way of thinking in Sendcloud. What would you say to that?
That's why my hair is teal. But actually, I think I have heard about this only on a high-level basis, right? So this is the thing about how organizations were different in the past. So they were red initially based on aggression, who's bigger. I think I've heard a little bit about this, but I'm not really aware fully, so I'm afraid I cannot give a good answer on this. Yeah, but thank you for reminding me. I'm gonna add it up to my reading list. That is indeed a very interesting theory.
Yeah, if you do become an expert on teal organization, I mean, the hair is already there. It's a perfect fit, right?
That's true. Exactly. That's true.
Yeah, so that's something to follow up on, I suppose. Well, since the answer was like this, I wanted to ask you, just if we have a few minutes extra, if there's anything, because my questions aren't perfect. Was there anything else that you wanted to say, to, I don't know, a younger you, other managers listening to this, a particular tip that they shouldn't forget about, being a tech leader?
Well, I think that one of the biggest and most important things that I would recommend is that no matter how many years of experience you've had as an engineer, the moment when you become a manager, you have 0 years of experience of being a manager.
Okay.
So, and I mean, that is good and bad from different aspects. So it's bad because you rarely know what you're doing. But it's good because remembering about that helps you to remember that sometimes you gotta be a bit easier on yourself. I think that I'm sure that everybody had a bad boss at some point who was a self-loving prick, but I do believe that most managers, especially the starting ones, they are having a really hard time just coming to terms with this fact that they are now managing people, because you've been at some point you are basically given quite a lot of agency over people's lives and livelihoods, right? So at some point you take decisions like, hey, I have to terminate this guy, and if I do that, it's likely that he'll need to go back to the country where he came from to live in the Netherlands. That is a hard decision to take. So what I would highly recommend is to try to find a good support network. Try to find yourself a mentor, ideally a manager that doesn't belong to your immediate vertical, so there is no conflict of interest.
Okay.
Talk more about and read more and write more, but most importantly, be kind but not nice. to yourself and to others.
Hey, that is great. That is such a strong note to end on. Thank you, Evgeny, for saying that. I
Thank
suppose
you.
that's our hour is up. And speaking of mentoring, I feel like I got a kind of mentoring session myself here from you. So that was really great to listen to. Before we wrap up, and if people are willing to give us this courtesy of staying just a few minutes longer, do you have any special announcements about, I don't know, what you're doing at Sendcloud? Are you hiring? Anything else you want to put out there? Can people follow you somewhere? What should people do after this?
Of course. Well, I'm not big on social networks, but definitely follow me on LinkedIn. There we will discover that we are hiring like crazy. We need front-enders, we need back-enders, we need DevOps people, we need more managers. So, and yeah, joining Sendcloud was probably the best career decision that I have ever made, and it's fun. And I would highly recommend. I would highly recommend it as a workplace, albeit it's at times hectic, but it is fun. So come join me on an e-commerce adventure.
That is amazing. Cathal was saying that this was very helpful. Thank you very much. Thank you for tuning in. From my side, a lot of what you said applies to STX Next as well. We're also hiring like crazy. We're also looking for developers. I suppose that's kind of industry-wide at this point. Do check out stxnext.com and check out our careers page. And on the other side of it, if you're also interested in in exponential growth, like Evgeny mentioned here, we're also looking for and open to new projects. We're a software development agency, in case you're meeting STX Next for the first time. We're specialized in Python, but we do just a whole bunch of things: backend, front-end development, product design, DevOps. We can take your product from an idea in your head to an MVP and beyond in production. So just reach out if you need to develop faster. If you're after this exponential growth, just look up STX Next. And it's also the best way to get the next episode of Tech Leaders Hub. Follow us on LinkedIn. That is the absolute best way to get in touch with us. We also now have a Facebook group. It's called Tech Leaders Hub. Very easy to find. Just type in Tech Leaders on Facebook. Join us there. Like I mentioned at the beginning, it's just starting, but we're looking to have some great conversations about tech leadership over there. You can also follow us on YouTube. We're on Twitter. We're a bunch of places. You can follow us on Instagram if you like. But anyway, for this session, that's gonna be it from myself and especially from you, Evgeny. Thank you so much for your time and sharing what this has been a blast.
Thank you very much, Jakub, as well. It was a pleasure to be invited, and excellent. I hope we'll meet again.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to our next conversation. I'm going to say it like that. Anyway, thank you everybody for joining, and I'm going to click the end broadcast button now. Thanks again. You guys have a nice day.